there, guys. So recently on stream, I did manage to beat Deus Ex Mankind Divided. It's a pretty good game. I enjoyed playing it, and if you're into games like Deus Ex, I'd certainly say it's a worthy sequel to the 2 years ago Deus Ex Human Revolution. That's not to say it's perfect. There are some pretty big issues with it, and the really kind of confusing thing is that Deus Ex Mankind Divided, despite in a lot of ways being mechanically better than its predecessor, doing all the things its predecessor did with an equal level of skill and fixing the issues its predecessor had, feels like a weaker game. Now I will say, in this video, in this specific video, I'm not going to be talking about any of the plot stuff for Deus Ex Mankind Divided, or more reasonably, I might touch on it slightly, but I'm going to touch on the plot within like the first 2 hours of gameplay. So, very, very, very slight spoilers. If it's something that happens right as the game starts, can even be counted as a spoiler. But be aware of that. I don't want to ruin the plot for anyone. Now, I will be talking about the plot of Human Revolution extensively. So if you haven't played Human Revolution yet, you might want to skip this video. So, with that in mind, let's talk about, again, the similarities between Mankind Divided and Human Revolution, the differences, and why the differences actually make Mankind Divided into a worse game, at least in my opinion. So, the great triumph of both games is the level design and the ability to build your Adam Jensen into whatever you really want him to be. For those of you that have not played the Deus Ex series, the overall plot is that human augmentation has become a thing. We have figured out how to make human augmentation work. We've figured out how to, plant artificial technology into human beings and actually make it work with the body very, very well. This isn't like, right now we can sort of do that and just give them people false legs, but now it's getting to the point where you can, do kind of like in Star Wars, the full-on Luke Skywalker mechanical hand thing, where it works just as well as the original, if not better. Because needless to say, once you get down the path of, oh hey, we've got this machine that, works with the nervous system, and works just as well as a human hand, and it's not too long before you're like, well, this one's actually a lot more precise than human hands. We've improved upon neural synapses. So, and you can sort of see where that goes. Mechanically, the way this manifests is that there's a lot of possible upgrades that your main character, Adam Jensen, can go through, and you sort of pick which path you want to go down. They fall into three basic categories. There are combat, which makes the game play like most any other first-person shooter, where you're just really, really good, your aim is steady, you run faster, all that stuff. I'll be honest, I don't go into the combat route very often, because if I want to play a first-person shooter, there are a lot of first-person shooters out there. There's also an infiltration route, where you can do things like survive in toxic gas areas, be able to bypass or lessen the effect of electronic interference on your augments, be able to jump higher, be able to punch through walls, things like that, which allows you to approach the level in a lot of ways that the more first-person shooter Jensen wouldn't be able to get to. And so you can bypass a lot of the enemies, and in theory it makes it play as more of a stealth action game. And then there is the hacking approach, which you can break into secure information systems, you can turn the automated defenses against the people who are being protected by them. You are able to, go through people's emails, learn passcodes, things like that. And the levels are all designed in such a way that you can approach it in any of those three ways. And in fact, at least in Mankind Divided, you usually have enough experience that you can actually go into two of the routes if you want to. At least that was my experience. And the brilliant thing about both the Deus Ex games is that the level design is absolutely set up so that you can do that. So that the level rewards no matter which path you went down, and you feel you're constantly, able to very easily get through situations that you can see would be harder for other people. So even though everyone is able to get through it, you constantly are being personally rewarded for your decision. And it's wonderful. So, Mankind Divided, I can't say it does this any better than Human Revolution, but it does it with an equal degree of skill. I never found myself disappointed in the level design. and I constantly found myself challenged because it kept raising the stakes as the plot went down. The other really good thing that Mankind Divided and Human Revolution do is they have a lot of downtime, and they really let you explore your world without everything just being a hostile environment where you're having to kill every enemy you come across. There's a lot of just living in the world that happens, and that's really important. It separates Deus Ex from other, similar type games, because there is so much of an emphasis on you really need to experience the world you're in. So, those are the big similarities, and both Mankind Divided and Human Revolution do this very well. I will say I do feel like Human Revolution is a little bit better about the world aspect, if only because... But that may also be because it was a new experience for me and I wasn't streaming, so I took more time to really absorb things. So I don't know if that's a fair comparison. But now, let's talk about what they do differently. Mankind Divided does solve the big issue that Deus Ex Human Revolution had. At least on release, they did patch this out later. Human Revolution always had a big issue where 4 times during the storyline you would end up finding yourself in this situation where you're having to fight against a boss. And the bosses had been designed by a separate studio that didn't quite understand what they were going for in Human Revolution, so the bosses were your typical FPS bosses. Cover-based, run around, take potshots where you can, try not to die. Whoever hits 0 hit points first loses. Which was great if you were going for a run-and-gun style, but if you were a hacking and infiltration specialist, you were screwed in that fight. You had to work so hard to bypass the bosses, because the game didn't reward your decision. And a lot of people objected and complained about that, and in Mankind Divided they fix it. The bosses that appear in Mankind Divided will typically not know where you are when the boss fight begins. They will know you're in the area, but they won't know specifically where you are, so you can relocate, you can get behind them, you can try and find terminals, you can, be able to get into positions where you can take potshots and then, move before they find you. It's handled very well, so that all the different styles actually can do well in that situation. So, with that in mind, why is Mankind Divided considered a worse game? Because, as I said before, I absolutely do consider it to be less impactful than Human Revolution. It does everything as well as Human Revolution, and it fixes the big problems Human Revolution had. But here's the problem, at least as I see it. Mankind Divided falls down when it comes to theming. Theming is a word that you may not necessarily recognize. It's not something that is talked about a whole lot, but is super important to gaming. Let me kind of show you theming in terms of Human Revolution, and again, this is where I talked about before. This is where I'm going to be talking about the plot of Human Revolution in a lot of detail. So, if you're still listening, this is where you might want to stop. Very brief overview of Human Revolution. You're Adam Jensen, you're just some guy, head of security for a company. Company gets attacked by terrorists, you get basically killed, but not quite, you're just barely clinging onto life, and so they rebuild you. They rebuild like 60% of your body. It's nuts the pure amount of augments that go into you in order to bring you back to life. And so, as you go through the game, the explicit plot is you're trying to find out who attacked you, where the kidnapped scientists ended up, and you're trying to effectively save the people in your company, and one of them being your ex-wife. However, below the very obvious plot, the secondary purpose of the way the game is set up is that they want you to experience the world they've put together. I talked about this a little bit before, where one of the big things that Deus Ex does well is it lets you live in the world. It's not purely about combat all the time. And they will put you in situations and have a lot of side missions that the vast majority of us are going to do, but the side missions are simply people struggling with the new world they find themselves in. Some of the side missions are awesome, where they've got, a guy who is trying to, get a little bit of money because he's got a very significant limp, and he really wants to be able to afford augments in order to make his life better. Others of them, though, are, at one point you're in a Hinsha, and there is a woman who is, apparently not the most successful prostitute on the block, and so the company that has her working as a prostitute is like, well, you know what? If you get these, sex augments, we can charge more for your services. And you're not really cutting it for us as a normal prostitute, so we need you to do this. But she is super like, I don't really want augments. And it raises really, really valid questions like, is it, if augments are a thing, jobs are going to start wanting you to get augments in order to be more efficient. Is that okay? I mean, that's like a job requiring you to go through plastic surgery, and it raises a lot of really big moral questions. But the awesome thing Human Revolution does is it simply raises these moral questions. Anytime Jensen in the game is, actually asked about something, it comes up with one of those response wheels where you can choose how he answers. The game doesn't actually really take a side. It's just like, look, here's what's happening. And it makes you live in that world for most of the game. And it leaves you with no real guiding light as to how should you feel about this. You have to decide that yourself. And that is, like I said, amazing, beautiful, and fantastic. I really, really, really like the way that it approaches that. I like it even more so because the way that Human Revolution ends, at the very, very end, and I am leaving out a lot of plot details because I don't see a reason to spoil unnecessarily, but at the very end of the game, you find yourself in a transmission booth. You've beaten the last actual boss. There's been a massive, massive, massive attack on mankind. A lot of augmented people have been basically forced to, their systems have gotten hacked and they've gone crazy. And the incident is over, you stopped the slaughter, but you find yourself in a position where you can choose what the massive news network is going to broadcast in relation to the event, and really set the narrative on what happens. You can choose to broadcast a very pro-augmentation message, where you look, mankind evolves, it's what happens. This is the next step in evolution. This is the future of humanity. We need to embrace this future and just see how, what perfection lies in our future. There's no reason to hold ourselves back. Or you can choose a much more nuanced and sort of, in the middle broadcast of augmentations are dangerous. And there are people out there that will use the power augmentation provides in order to subject and repress the rest of us. Augmentation is and holds a massive, massive, massive future for mankind, but we have to control it. We need very stringent regulations and very committed people in order to decide where augmentation should go and what should and shouldn't be allowed. Or you can choose to, basically put humanity first and say augmentation is a deviation from what makes us human. It's a way in order to funnel our evolution in a way it wasn't meant to go. It's a, stepping away from the natural forces that have brought mankind to where we are. We need to put an end to augmentation now before it gets out of control. And depending on, and that's it. There actually is a fourth choice where you can just basically destroy the broadcast system without saying anything and let mankind pick for itself. But those are the choices you get. And again, the game makes no moral judgment on you. It makes it doesn't encourage any of the three paths. And the paths are building off of your experience through the game. You've seen the good side of augmentation. You've seen the bad side of augmentation. You have absolutely seen the way that your augments and the fact that you are state-of-the-art allowed you to single-handedly overcome massive, massive trials. And is that something we want to push to the rest of humanity? We don't know. So at the end of the day, Deus Ex Human Revolution, the core theming of the game, the thing that everything really addressed and pushed towards, was an open environment in which you were able to decide what did you want to do, how did you want to interact with the world. And I know I'm rambling here a little bit, but it's everything in it. The world was not defined for you. The world was not set up in order to be, in order to go down a specific narrative. The world was set up with a plot you would go through, but the overall question of what is the proper approach was not answered for you. And that's where I feel Mankind Divided falls. Because Mankind Divided, it kept the augmentation aspect, it kept the level design aspect, it still put a world there for you to explore and experience. It, allowed you to interact with the world on your terms however you wanted to, but unlike Human Revolution, Mankind Divided did not keep its hands off the ethics of what was going on. Mankind Divided absolutely had, some things to say about the ethicality of what was happening within its world. A lot of people talk about Mankind Divided to a certain extent mirrors the Black Lives Matter movement, and in Mankind Divided, very, very, very brief overview. Like I said, I'm not going to spoil the plot in any detail, but there absolutely is, after the AUG incident, where AUGs were basically forced to go crazy at the end of the previous game, augmentation has been very, very, very harshly regulated, and the police view AUGs as potential threats. No matter what they're doing, they're instantly seen as possible criminal elements, and very, very, very obviously discriminated against by police forces. And as you go through, you very regularly find yourself put into a position where you are come to blows and come to odds with the police. You have to fight directly against the police. And it very much feels like Deus Ex Mankind Divided is trying to make a political statement about the unfairness of assumptions. You've got a news media that works actively against you. It doesn't feel... Human Revolution just presented a world the way it would likely be, and left it to you to decide how you felt about that. Whereas Mankind Divided, it has the world acting directly against you, and very much wants you to feel persecuted. There's a lot of little moments in there where you are put in a position that is inherently unfair. And a lot of the times they have conversations about how much harder your life is simply because you're augmented. And I feel like that's to a certain degree a portrayal of the core value of the Deus Ex series, where it's not supposed to make you suddenly... it's not supposed to make those decisions for you. And I feel like they got a little bit too hands-on with the morality of this one. Another big example of that in Mankind Divided, and like I said, this is like the second storyline mission you get, but it is a slight spoiler, so be aware. Mankind Divided, like the second mission is you break into your employer's office in order to put a bug on your boss's phone, more or less. That way you can, eavesdrop into his conversation and find out whether or not he is working in order to set AUGs up for committing crimes that they're not doing. And the thing is, this mission kind of comes out of nowhere. In Human Revolution, my version of Adam Jensen was generally pretty pro-AUGs. He was grateful to his boss, at that point it was David Seraph, for saving his life, and he was pretty okay with augmentation. However, you also had the option of making yourself a very bitter Adam Jensen, who kind of saw himself as some sort of weird amalgamism and barely human anymore. The famous line that we always hear in reference to Deus Ex is, "I didn't ask for this." And that's where it comes from. When people are like, "Wow, you've got so many cool upgrades," and he's like, "I didn't ask for this. I didn't want to live like this. This is not life." And it leaves you open to how you want to approach that. And in Mankind Divided, it doesn't. One of the storyline missions is, you don't trust your boss, you think he might be working against you, go put a bug on his phone. And I'm like, pushing me into a position where I have to question, who is on my side and who isn't. That should be something I come to organically. That should be like a side mission that, if I go down there, I have the option of saying, no, I don't trust, the people who are supposedly on my side. I'm going to take action in order to find out the truth. There were never missions where I had to go into, in the first one you could break into all kinds of computers around Seraph Industries and learn what was going on, but you weren't required to. And so again, it just felt like Mankind Divided was trying to walk me down the game it wanted me to play, instead of setting itself up as a world and letting me explore it and make my own conclusions. And again, that brings us back to, when I talk about theming, I talk about you should have a central premise of your game. Human Revolution's central premise was being able to interact with the world at your terms. The mechanics allowed you to set yourself up. The level design allowed you to explore the level regardless of what setup you used. And the world was simply a world that was created for you to interact with. There was no expectation as to these would be the conclusions you drew. It was simply, here's a situation, explore the world, decide for yourself. Mankind Divided attempts to kind of also have a game for you to interact with on your own terms, except it has certain conclusions it forces you to make. And so that's not a continuation of that theme. It's a violation of that theme. And that's why as you're playing it, you just feel less rewarded, because you're like, the reason I play Deus Ex games is I want to be able to explore that world and see a reality I don't have right now. But I don't want you telling me the way that reality affects me. I want to be affected by it. So, that is Deus Ex Mankind Divided. Like I said, I don't want to end this kind of pseudo-review, pseudo-overview on a negative note. I do certainly honor and respect the game, but at the end of the day, I do feel like Mankind Divided does not stay true to the vision of Deus Ex. It wants to be it wants to be a interactive movie rather than an interactive game. So, I do recommend it. If you like Deus Ex, it is certainly a worthy successor to Human Revolution, but there are things that game designers need to keep in mind, especially when dealing with an established series. People have a certain expectation of what this series is about, and if you change elements of that, they're either going to like it or hate it, usually the latter. Thanks for tuning in, guys. I will see you all in the next one.